The Retrobit Sega Saturn Pro Controller featured in today's review was provided courtesy of Retrobit. First teased back in 2018, Retrobit's Sega Saturn Pro Controller has finally arrived in players' hands. This new take on the classic Saturn Model 2 controller adds several modern features, making it suited for contemporary and retro gaming at your whim. Retrobit sent me a production sample to share with all of you a few months back, and I have been looking forward to sharing a review of this controller for some time. With the final retail version in hand with the latest updated 1.01 firmware, is the Retrobit Sega Saturn Pro Controller the end-all be-all of Saturn controllers? Continuing their partnership with Sega, Retrobit's Saturn Pro Controller comes in an authentic Saturn-style box. The controller in its packaged color takes center position in all its glossy glory against the Saturn-style stripes. Saturn branding flanks it to the left, while the name of the pad sits nicely embossed above. The two included receivers are clearly indicated on the front, showing that this controller is ready to go for a multitude of devices. On the back is a nice description of the pad and key features listed in 3 languages. A series of product renders are also showcased. Slipping off the outer cover reveals the hard box within, depicting a nice outline view of the controller while the sides bear the Saturn branding. Inside the box you'll find your Saturn Pro Controller, Saturn and USB receivers, USB-C charging cable, thank you note, and finally a user manual. The Saturn Pro Controller is a faithful reimagining of the Model 2 Saturn pad. Rocker-style D-pad and 6 face buttons are present. The media control markings are also present, giving it that authentic look. Start, Select, and Home buttons reside in the middle of the pad, which will look familiar to anyone who has previously owned Retrobit's other wireless Saturn pads. The thicker shell from the previous Retrobit wireless Saturn pad is also present to accommodate the built-in 500 mAh battery. This time though, the handles have been slightly extended and the overall shell is slightly larger to accommodate 2 built-in rumble motors in each handle. The result of this change is quite significant, as it makes the pad rest more in the palm of the hands instead of on your finger joints. This makes the pad more comfortable to use during prolonged gaming sessions. The biggest difference between the Saturn Pro Controller and the Model 2 is the inclusion of 2 thumbsticks at the bottom center of the controller's face. They use the same form factor as those found on a Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, but feature Hall effect sensors for better precision and durability. The height doesn't extend past the height of the D-pad or other face buttons, keeping them safe from harm if you pocket the pad to take to an event or throw in a bag for travel. The caps of each stick provide sufficient grip, and resistance is excellent. I had concerns about my thumbs hitting at first with their close proximity to each other, but thanks to the physical ranges present on each stick, it has not been an issue. The sticks feature a physical click for L3, R3 respectively, and they give a satisfying sound when used. The next major difference with the Saturn Pro Controller is its inclusion of an extra pair of shoulder buttons. They bear Switch-style indicators, ideal for using the controller on the platform. Unlike a Model 2 controller though, the Saturn Pro Controller uses membranes instead of microswitches. While the lack of the satisfying click will be missed, functionality remains the same. All 4 buttons feel great to the touch with good travel distance. My only observable complaint about the shoulder buttons is that when pressed at the outer edge of the controller, L and R can go past the plastic of the housing. It has never impacted gameplay, and using the buttons from the inner edge or top results in it being completely unnoticeable. Joining the shoulder buttons is a USB-C port and a set of 4 LEDs used for indicating various operating modes of the pad or player number on the Switch. The pad as a whole has a good weight to it, and the shell is very sturdy. My typical assortment of twists and bend tests were laughed off. Even a scientific balcony drop left the controller with no adverse effects on its operation. So for your everyday normal wear and tear, the Saturn Pro Controller should hold up just fine. As for the receivers, they remain the same on the outside as the previous Retrobit Saturn receivers. Inside they are using Retrobit's newer V2 hardware, giving them better latency and performance. Unfortunately, the Saturn receiver still relies on micro USB for any potential firmware updates. With the Saturn Pro Controller featuring a receiver for both the Saturn and USB devices, there are a metric butt-ton of use cases the controller can be used with. I'm going to start with the Saturn receiver first in this video. The receiver plugs nicely into the Saturn console with no death grip to be found. I spent a good amount of time testing titles that had incompatibilities with Retrobit's V1 wireless Saturn controllers, and am happy to report these are all working as intended. I have yet to find any title that has given the controller compatibility issues. As for the controller's performance, it has been, in a word, superb. The V2 receiver operates under a frame of latency, so no matter how quick the action, any delay is unnoticeable to the 99% of us average folk. If you happen to be superhuman, well, I guess stick with wired options. Bad jokes aside, pressing buttons on the pad has them happen exactly as you would expect on the screen. After hours of testing, I have yet to encounter any missed inputs regardless of title or genre. The physical feel of each press has been pleasing and the buttons aren't overly loud. D-pad performance has been sublime, and it will remain the way almost all Saturn games will be played with the pad. The rocker has been solid, and I don't experience any misreads as I play. All combos I attempt work as expected in Street Fighter, and even in games like Panzer Dragoon, aiming feels great. However, in the case of Panzer Dragoon, switching to the Saturn Pro Controller's 3D controller mode will make it shine. That's right, those thumbsticks included on the pad give it the ability to be used in 3D controller-enabled titles with a simple hold of the Start and B button for 5 seconds. I have spent an unhealthy amount of time doing direct comparisons between the sticks found on the Saturn Pro Controller and those found on an OEM 3D controller in supported titles. Results have shown that the range values and feel are nearly identical, giving superb results in games. The physical build will play a factor in whether you like the feel or not, to be sure, but the overall performance is there, and it is great. After hours of testing, my only complaint when using the Saturn Pro Controller on a Sega Saturn comes to the mapping of the shoulder buttons. The marked ZL and ZR triggers correspond to the Saturn's L and R buttons, while the pad's L and R buttons mirror the Z and C buttons. I would personally prefer it if L and R were L and R, while the more trigger-esque buttons did the mirroring. Completely a matter of preference, mind you, as either way the buttons have worked great in supported titles. Having Z and C mirrored has also been nice for me since I am that guy who likes to play fighters with shoulder buttons rather than 6 face buttons. Retrobit has announced that additional macros are coming to the pad in future updates, so perhaps one to swap the shoulder buttons can make the cut eventually. It is also worth pointing out that the triggers are digital only, so they will behave differently in 3D controller supported titles where analog triggers were used. In my tests, I have yet to find a game where this has negatively impacted the experience. That being said, preference will dictate how you feel about it. But after these hours of testing, I don't think I could tell you one game where the analog triggers made a significant enough impact for me to miss them. This could possibly change after more hours of play, but right now I highly doubt it. I do acknowledge those of you who may find this to be a deal breaker though. When paired with the USB receiver, the Saturn Pro Controller can operate in either direct or X input modes, for a wealth of compatibility with devices. I have tested it with retro PCs to the Polymega, and the experience has been excellent. Latency on every tested device has been superb, resulting in an unnoticeable delay in games regardless of device. While it is fun to mess around with the controller on devices like the Polymega and Evercade Versus, PC and Switch are where most of my time has been spent with it. On PC and X input mode, the controller maps like a standard Xbox pad, giving it ideal compatibility with modern titles. Across multiple genres and titles, the pad has handled itself well. While I do prefer more D-pad-oriented games or fighters, the analog sticks put up a good showcase in shooters. Thanks to the Hall effect sensors, dead zones and steppings are well defined and responsive. Since receiving the early production sample, I have achieved a few wins in Apex Legends. It takes a bit more finesse to handle the sticks for shooters when they are smaller, but the performance is certainly there. Adventure titles fare equally as well, and it has hit the point where I have become quite used to the feel of each stick in my library. The Z and C buttons are once again mirrored to the L and R buttons, so it gives some flexibility on how you would like to control your games. In emulation, I have found this to be enjoyable since it gives the perfect feel for both Genesis and Saturn games, as well as PlayStation and beyond. On Switch, the pad once again behaves as expected in my titles. Button mapping is defaulted to indicators in games, mirroring the labeling on the pad. Nintendo standards have these buttons in the opposite positions though, and this does change the feel of how some games play. With a quick macro, you can switch the buttons to their proper positions. The option of having both methods is welcomed, as player preferences are likely to be different. The controller is detected by the Switch as a Pro Controller, so system-wide remapping is technically possible. But my attempts on the current firmware have been met with an error upon trying to save the configuration. Using the Saturn Pro Controller in USB mode also activates the dual built-in rumble motors for supported titles. Rumble strength is quite pleasing as a fan of the feature, but it does cause the buttons to rattle slightly. Even with rumble enabled, battery life doesn't appear to be affected too much. On a single charge, the pad can last anywhere between 15 to 18 hours. The pad will turn off automatically after a few minutes of inactivity to further conserve power. USB-C fast charging is supported, so the pad can be ready to go again for an additional few hours with minimal charge time. Full charging can take between 90 to 120 minutes depending on your charger. Thankfully, the battery drain issues found on the original Retrobit V1 Sega controllers have been solved, as I left my samples sitting for a week and they were still fully powered and good to go. With the version 1.01 firmware, there aren't many things I have to critique about the Saturn Pro Controller. It does what it says it will do and does it very well overall. But that being said, there is a lingering issue in Duke Nukem 3D where Duke will slowly move forward on his own when the pad is set to 3D mode. Many will also call out the lack of analog triggers, and I want to acknowledge that being a legitimate gripe, but at the same time, I still have yet to find a game where it has negatively impacted the experience for me. Hopefully we can see the switch button mapping issue be addressed soon as well. I want to note that I have received a few comments regarding the controller not turning itself off after use and draining the battery. It isn't something I have personally had an issue with, and if encountered should be brought up with Retrobit for troubleshooting or replacement. The Saturn Pro Controller has quickly become my go-to pad for Saturn gaming. In its standard use mode, it makes for a more comfortable Model 2 controller with a great D-pad and fast response. The mirroring of the shoulder buttons to Z and C also lets me play games more in line with other systems, which I enjoy. The added functionality of being able to use its analog sticks for 3D controller-enabled games is also a joy. Again, while the triggers may be digital only, I have not found them to hinder the playing experience in the slightest. Compatibility with the Saturn library has also been amazing. Being able to use the pad for PC and emulation has been a fantastic secondary use case. I would like to see a few more customization macros added in the future, but where we are with the 1.01 firmware is a solid foundation. Those are my thoughts on the Sega Saturn Pro Controller from Retrobit. I think it is honestly a fantastic replacement option for OEM controllers that have seen better days. And for anyone looking for an all-in-one solution to having a standard Model 2 Sega pad, plus 3D controller support in some fashion, it's a great option. Now again, there are some things that people will consider shortcomings, such as the lack of analog triggers, but after testing all those games, I still just don't see it as being an issue. Personally. You do you. But big thank you to Retrobit for sending this controller out my way and letting me test it out, and a big thank you to all of you for watching today's review. I hope you have found it informative, entertaining, thoughtful, insightful, life-changing, just anything, I guess. Just want you to feel something. But here at the end, do have the couple of usual favors to ask. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to hit that thumbs up, thumbs down button, depending on how much you liked this video, as well as that sub button notification bell so you can see when all the new videos drop on the channel, because there are always so many and you don't want to miss them. Come on now. And for anyone interested in further helping support the channel and keep it going so we can keep doing fun things like this, be sure to check out that join button here on YouTube or the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Little bit really goes a long way to keeping us going, and we are super grateful to all of our current champs who have done so. You just remain amazing, keep being you. Thank you so much. But until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome, keep on gaming, and we'll see you back next video.